So it's my pleasure now to welcome Paul Kline and John McVey, and we're going to talk about the challenges of underground mining. Hey.
Adam.
Hi. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Why do we need to innovate in underground mining? Don't we know how to do it? We've been doing it for a long time. What innovation is there?
Hit us with the hard question straight off the bat, mate.
So give us a sense. Give us a sense now, for the audience. Where is underground mining? Right? Everybody has a picture in their head of an open pit. Right? We all know what that is. We've flown over one or we've driven past one. We've seen images in magazines. And underground mining is something that unless you physically have gone into a mine, it's sort of a mystery. So if you could you sort of give us a sense of where is underground mining in 2023?
Sure. I'll take this one.
Go first.
Sure. So there's a book called De Re Metallica. It was written in 1556. And up until that point, there was nothing really written about mining or underground mining. It was actually Hoover who translated it with his wife from Latin into English. Worth a read. They talk about, and it's in the first 20 or 30 pages, about gravity-fed water systems. We still use that today in underground mining. So in terms of the progression of the industry, there's some things that still are in use, that have been in use for hundreds of years, and there's obviously new technology that companies are trying to implement.
We can't improve upon gravity.
No. Hey, it's free.
Yeah.
Right? It's fantastic. I think there's the public perception of what underground mining is, and I think maybe half the room might have seen Zoolander, and I know that for my friends and family that haven't seen or been in and about an underground mine, that's what they think about. It's what they've seen in the movies. It's the canary in the cage, but in reality it's very different. Modern mining is underground. It's big machines, moving high tonnages, sometimes depending on the grade of the deposit, not super high tonnages, but the mines of the future in my mind are block caves, sub-level caves that are doing higher tonnage profiles than what open cut mines do. There's a handful of block caves around the world that do 30 million tonnes per annum, which outstrips most medium-sized open pits.
So one of the things that we've also seen happen in underground mining is it's getting deeper. What are the risks associated with getting deeper, and how are you innovating to reduce those risks, improve upon safety? How is technology helping you? How is automation helping you?
So I might talk to the risks, and I'll let John maybe talk to some of the technology. So as you go deeper and deeper into the earth, there is natural ground stress, which before you open up a void, it sits at equilibrium. The moment you create void underground, either through tunnelling or production mining, that stress has to go somewhere. Generally, the deeper you go, the higher that stress, and when it releases, it happens in explosive fashion. So you see rock bursts, heave in the floor, and if you've got people in that environment, they're exposed to injury, equipment's exposed to damage. And from a business perspective, you're looking at potential stoppages of months, up to 6 months. And there have been examples in the industry from seismic events, large-scale stoppages, which, mining is capital intensive and you want to have continual return on that. So certainly stress, the deeper you go, that's more of an issue. Heat, contaminants in the air from diesel equipment, all of these things get worse and worse the deeper you get into the earth. Some of the South African underground mines, they're at 2.5 kilometres to 3 kilometres deep. The heat at the bottom, it's like working outside today. It's quite warm out there, hotter than that and humid. So how do you actually manage the human body in that environment becomes really challenging.
How do you monitor that, if we can just stick with that topic?
Yep.
You send someone down for a shift, or you send a crew down for a shift, and you know it's hot, you know it's humid. Presumably all of your workers have undergone pretty rigorous health examinations. But there's always a risk when you go underground. So how are you monitoring that in real time? What are the data you're collecting?
So on the stress front, big mines that have seismicity as a risk have monitoring systems, and this is where technology comes in. Go back 20 or 30 years ago, it was the black box of seismicity, and you wouldn't know when it's coming, whereas now we have monitoring systems that actually you can trend the data points over time, and certainly you can see an area becoming more seismically active, and then you have a management plan that would say either remove people from the area for a certain amount of time or go and do de-stress activities either through drilling or blasting. I mean, I'm not sure what Procon's using in terms of heat. I suppose in your part of the world, it's the other end of the spectrum. So Procon.
Well, we're
Yeah, John, you want to?
we're a Canadian contractor, so it's a nice warm place to spend the winter in most respects. But yeah, backing up a little bit, certainly the easy stuff has been found, right?
Yeah,
So we're going deeper and deeper. And as a contractor who builds underground mines only, we don't get involved in open pit. This is good for business in some respects. But the other thing we're sort of better known for is working in remote northern locations, right, where you're flying in, flying out, mobilizing on a winter ice road, and we're going to probably get into the labor discussion as well, and the ramifications for these types of projects becoming more remote, a little more exotic as we go deeper and deeper. I think there's a certain element of the workforce that's attracted to those adventures, quite frankly, and a lot of them work for my company today. That's sort of what we've become known for, at least within our domestic market in Canada. So there's some challenges, but there's some opportunities as well as our industry evolves this way.
What do you think are the most promising technologies?
Well, the obvious one is the battery electric equipment. The onset of that, or the adoption of that, is happening possibly a little quicker than I had anticipated as a contractor with a big, huge diesel fleet. There's an obvious transition there, but the way it's gone so far is, some of the bigger mining companies are making the initial purchases. Everything's 2x, so there's cost impacts. But as a contractor, we get to operate and maintain. There's not supposed to be a lot of maintenance, and we'll see how that goes over time. But so far, so good, and excited, quite frankly, to be involved. One of our major projects in British Columbia gold mine has a fleet of 8 55-ton battery electric trucks, which I think we've got more hours on those trucks now than any other mine in the world, according to the Sandvik guys. So it's exciting to support that evolution and be involved.
And certainly as we sort of look towards a carbon neutral mine, British Columbia, I mean, it's 90% to 95% hydropower in that province, and so you're drawing off a renewable power source to run BEV. So mines in British Columbia can actually be carbon neutral without offsets, whereas if you're drawing your mains power from coal or oil or gas, you can run BEVs, but you're still burning fuel. And I think that's a challenge for the industry around. People have a desire to go to BEVs, but what's the value proposition? And I think so. They're not saying that there's not a value proposition for BEVs from the heat and the contaminants piece. Far better off running an electric piece of equipment underground than a diesel. But if a company's focus is on carbon neutral, if you're still pulling off a coal-fired power plant for your mains power, you end up having to go and do carbon credits elsewhere to achieve that goal.
So it's easy for me to imagine transitioning from diesel to battery electric improves. First of all, you eliminate diesel emissions underground.
Yep.
So it reduces your need to filter, it improves overall air quality. Is it having any negative impact? Or is it only positive once the transition is made?
The example I gave, the mine was designed for 30-ton diesel haul trucks, and now we're operating 55-ton battery electric trucks, which are fast, quiet, and so obviously there's some safety considerations that have to be dealt with, but can be reasonably, right? But yeah, it's an adjustment in many respects, but There's the positives far outweigh the negatives. The air is noticeably cleaner, the miners say, and that's never a bad thing.
I think just the gap at the moment is around the longevity of batteries. So, a diesel piece of equipment, you can either bring a refueling unit to it, or you can easily drive and refuel diesel. Obviously, the change out of batteries takes time, and depending on your mine layout and how you're using them, some operators are seeing a slight reduction in productivity of those units. But once we sort of get to a point where the batteries last for an entire shift, then I see very little downside to making that jump, aside from cost. It is more expensive.
So how are you approaching safety now differently than you did 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago? Thinking here through the lens of how you train your teams on all aspects of safety, thinking about the mine collapse in Chile, and fortunately all the miners that were saved there. What are you using now by way of technology, whether it's some sort of three-dimensional goggles or rooms where you can have 3D projections that simulate underground working conditions? What's the state of the art training your teams?
A simple question, but it's complicated. We've come a long way as an industry, right? And no injury is acceptable, is our going in position. Certainly training, I think, is key. And, one of our challenges as a contractor working for different owners is that they'll have their own programs. We have to, and we have ours, obviously, foundational programs, but we have to assimilate, adapt, and find something that both serves our customers' needs and keeps my employees safe. So training, I think, certainly in this domain, as the workforce transitions, we'll see some new challenge. We're seeing a lot of the old miners retire. I think the COVID years probably accelerated that. Became difficult to travel, and so and that's not all bad, by the way. We're getting younger. We're needing to transition in some respects, but a lot of experience goes out the door during this transition. So we'll have to be extra diligent. But it's a culture, right? We instill it from day one, and if you don't support it or follow the expectations, you won't fit, and that's just sort of the laws of the jungle in some respects, but it's so important underground.
So simultaneously, you're seeing a lot of change in the technology for mining underground. You're also losing a generation's worth of knowledge in your mining teams. So you're bringing in a younger group of miners. Are there any commonalities among the new, younger group that you have learned to manage that still present you with problems? I mean, I assume somebody who's 22 going into mining today might have a different mindset, certainly has a different lived experience than somebody who was 22 30 years ago.
It's quite interesting. So I'm currently working over in Tennessee at some underground zinc mines that have been in operation since the 60s. So we do have still some people who've been in the industry and at the sites for 40 years, and then we've got the brand new people who are young 20s coming into the industry, and yet two very, very different life experiences. And I think it is the challenge for the younger demographic, and look, I'm probably part of that, is around how do you maximise your learning opportunity from the older generation before they depart. I mean, underground mining is different to open pit in that you do need to listen to the rock. There is an element of using your senses to manage risk underground, and that comes with just sheer time in the field. And that's why these older miners, they are worth their weight in gold because of learned experiences, some near misses back in the day. So the challenge is, how do you impart that to younger people who think they know everything? And that was me. I think when I first came into the industry, I was young and I'd come out of college and I thought, right, I know absolutely everything.
Smartest person in the room.
Oh yeah, and look, I'll be honest, there was a couple of old miners who took me out the back and sort of said, hey, you know nothing. not everyone is so receptive to that discussion these days.
Yeah.
And interesting listening to the previous panel talk about DEI, and I think inclusion is the way of the future, and it's certainly something I'm very passionate about. I know John is with ProCon, but how do you still drive accountability within your organisation while being inclusive at the same time? And I think that's quite a challenge for mining operations, given we're a very time dependent business. Like, things have to happen, because if you're not moving, you're losing money.
So John, how do you deal with this? New guys coming in, they look at you and say, oh, what does that old guy know?
Guys and girls.
What?
Guys and girls.
Guys and girls. What does that old guy know? What can he teach me?
Well, a lot. I think, and I do want to come back to DEI, because I consider myself a bit of a champion there too. I think it's so important as we head into a market that's really going to be struggling and competing for labor, that we increase the size of the pool. Right? And maybe just on that, while I'm on a roll here, one thing we have done well in these remote locations is engage with Indigenous partners, right? And in a lot of cases in Canada, we're building these mines in their traditional territories, treaty territories in some cases, and we can have 18 to 20% Indigenous content on our crews. We started this year at 6% female, and we're happy to report, I think last week we're up to 8. So obviously a long ways to go. And there's other forms of diversity, and we've launched a DEI program within ProCon, and made some commitments to ourselves. And it's all about the workplace ultimately, right? And the culture, and if you take a diversity hire and put them into a toxic workplace, it doesn't work, right? So we're starting with our frontline supervision. We're going to be, setting some expectations and helping them. There's these little things called microaggressions that, amongst other things, include the terminology we use: man hours, man basket. Foreman, and those of us veterans of the industry, it just rolls off our tongue, right? But that has to change. That has to change, and then we'll create the right environment that's inclusive. We'll increase our odds of attracting a diverse workforce, and we'll succeed in a market that's going to be really challenged for labor, and that's mining.
So what are the strategies that you're employing or you're thinking about employing to attract young talent? What are they looking for in a job, culture? 100%. You can't diversify by putting somebody into a toxic workplace. So there really is a lot of complexity to recruiting young talent beyond simply recruiting the best.
And I think one of the key challenges at the moment is the view or the public perception of mining, and how that starts from a very, very young age. There's very little positive branding of the mining industry, whether that be open cut or underground. Lots of positive branding around technology. Obviously, it's easy to sell this, but mining for most people is dirty, pollutes the environment, leaves bad legacy, tailings dam failures, for example. And I think in terms of how strategies, you need to go all the way back to curriculum in schools, and this is a partnership between industry and government around how do we have positive messaging. We don't need to put us up in lights, but at least clearly articulate that none of this exists without mining. The microphone, the TVs, the iPhone. So this young generation that we're going to rely on to come in and operate all this technology, they have a view, well, no, we don't need mining, we'll just use 3D printers to get it. Well, no, that all comes from somewhere, but we never tell them that. And I think that's kind of step one, is we need to change the optics at a very young age through schooling, positive messaging through the media, rather than just people's TikTok saying, well, mining's bad. And I think unless you fix it there, we're not actually going to get out of this vicious cycle of being short of people, me taking people from John and John taking people from me, and it just goes around and around and around. I think the second part is then, as organisations and as leaders within the industry, it is around how do you create this this workplace that is modern and not entrenched in this is how we've always done it. I remember when people first started talking about diversity, say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that's all they talked about. It was the buzzword, let's go and do diversity. And diversity is your end goal out here, that's your output. You need to create a workplace that is inclusive and fun to be in. I think that the analogy that I like to use, you can invite someone to a party, but if you have poor music and you run out of food, they're not going to stay very long, are they? And I think that's a good parallel to a workplace. You can invite diverse candidates or even just people from outside the industry into your organisation, but if it's not the right environment, they don't stay. And when they leave noisily, and they talk to their friends and say, well, no, don't go mining. And I think that's something that's challenged here in the US, in Canada, and also in the Australian context as well.
If I could build off that, I do see some positive momentum, and I think the political leaders needed to understand this first, right? And as they make their commitments to be carbon neutral by 2050, 40, 60, whatever the number is, we're going to need a lot of minerals. I think, the young people want to, they want a meaningful engagement in work, and there's been no obvious means to that end in mining historically, in their minds, right? And you talked about your kids, Adam. We learn a lot from our kids. In my case, my daughter in particular. I don't win too many discussions, but I know what she values, right, in terms of the planet and sustainability and social issues. And I think there's a way for us to get there, to the point where our industry becomes something that people like that are attracted to. I think, going back to first principles and telling them how many metals are in here and where they come from, that's a complicated discussion. But if you're producing critical minerals, battery metals, and some of the other terminology that's entered the discourse in the last couple years, I think there's a means to an end there with young people. I really do.
So how can the messaging be more effective for the general public and politicians? As we look forward, we know that we have to globally increase metal production by a factor of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 100, depending on the metal. We look at mines like Chuquicamata, which was an open pit developed 100 plus years ago that provided the first seed capital for the Guggenheim fortune. And now they're mining underground for 5 years and probably have another 100 years of reserves at current prices. We look at Bingham Canyon outside Salt Lake City. Kennecott there is likely going to transition to underground. I think that's already in the works. So we're going to see a need for more underground mining. One of the things we've seen in the United States, we know that we need a significant amount of, you just mentioned them, battery metals, nickel and copper. And we have seen our administration in Washington, D.C. not permit new underground mines that could provide that battery-grade nickel and copper. So there's this disconnect between people that say they want one thing, and then when you give them the solutions, they don't want those solutions to be put in place. So how can the messaging change? What is the magic elixir?
Yeah, if I had it, I'd share it.
I think it's time and reality, right? And I was talking to myself earlier, don't get into politics because it's a slippery slope. But I think we're having the right conversations, though. I think we really are, right? In Ontario, and someone mentioned it yesterday, there's 2 battery plants being built, one by Stellantis, the other by Volkswagen. The federal government is pouring all sorts of tax incentives into these projects. And yet, where are the metals going to come from to build these big projects? Oops, right? We're not really thinking along those lines. But that reality will at some point in our future come home to roost, and we'll figure it out. Put me in the optimist camp.
I suppose my take on it, governments only ever last for 4 years or 5 years, right? And they say the right things. Maybe they'll try again for a second round, but they are able to provide lip service and not necessarily deliver on commitments, and we've seen that the world over. It's the swell of public sentiment that never goes away. And I think it is around how do you convince the public that for us to be able to do this, we need mining, we need underground mining, we need people to come into it. And that is through, I think, education, positive branding in social media. That's obviously how a lot of people actually get news these days. And there are some industry bodies, like the ICMM would be a good example, that are trying to do that, but it's hard work and it's slow.
Yeah, we're here in 2023, and underground mining now is the safest it's ever been. It's more efficient than it's ever been. It's agile. You're responding to changes in market fluctuations globally, and you have the potential to respond to the call for this significant increase in metals. It's about convincing the general public that you can do it.
Yep.
You can do it well.
Producing the metals our world needs.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank both of you for spending some time talking with us this afternoon about underground mining. It really has to be the future. If we think about all of the materials that we need for the green energy transition, they're all underground. And when we look at exploration and discovery over the last 100 years, what we see as a function of time is we went from deposits on the surface that we tripped over, easy to find, we're mining those or we already mined them, and now we're going underground. And what we know is we can do it efficiently, we can do it safely, we can do it at current market prices, and underground mines are poised to increase production and development so that we can supply the world with the energy critical metals they want. So thank you both for taking the time this afternoon to join us, and thank the audience.